The classified report that landed on my desk at 11:47 p.m. last Tuesday changed everything I thought I knew about American power. I've spent 40 years studying how empires rise and fall, witnessed the Soviet collapse firsthand, analyzed China's ascent, tracked America's unipolar moment from its peak to what I assumed would be its gradual decline. But nothing prepared me for the intelligence briefing that arrived through secure channels Tuesday night, with a timestamp that will haunt me forever. In exactly 72 hours, Vladimir Putin didn't just challenge American hegemony. He ended it not through nuclear threats or massive military campaigns, but through a sequence of moves so precisely calculated that by Thursday evening, the Monroe Doctrine was dead. NATO was in psychological collapse, and American naval supremacy had become a historical footnote. Let me walk you through those 72 hours, because what happened represents the most catastrophic strategic failure in American history. And the most terrifying part, we created every condition that made Putin's victory possible. The first domino fell at precisely 14:23 Moscow time on Tuesday, when Russian naval vessels entered Venezuelan territorial waters. Not a single ship, not a routine visit, but a coordinated flotilla carrying equipment that satellite analysis confirmed as hypersonic missile systems. Zircon missiles capable of Mach 9 speeds that render American naval defenses obsolete. But here's what the public didn't learn, and what should terrify every American who understands naval warfare. Those missiles weren't positioned for symbolic effect. Intelligence sources confirmed they were actively targeting the USS Gerald R. Ford, our most advanced aircraft carrier currently operating in the Caribbean with 5,000 American sailors aboard. For the first time since 1962, foreign weapons systems were aimed at American naval assets from positions we considered permanently secure. The psychological impact on American naval commanders was immediate and devastating. Ship captains who had operated with assumptions of invulnerability suddenly found themselves calculating survival probabilities for their crews. Wednesday brought the second domino. Putin's forces didn't just deploy missiles in Venezuela. They established what intelligence analysts recognized as permanent military infrastructure. Command centers built to Russian specifications, communication arrays linking directly to Moscow, radar systems providing coverage that overlapped with existing Russian installations in Cuba. This wasn't temporary positioning for diplomatic leverage. This was the construction of a Russian military bridgehead in the Western Hemisphere designed for expansion and long-term operational capability. By Wednesday evening, NATO capitals were in panic mode that I've never witnessed during 5 decades of analyzing alliance behavior. Emergency sessions in Brussels, panicked conferences in Berlin, hushed conversations in Washington, where words like existential and unprecedented dominated secure communications. But the third domino was what transformed a regional crisis into global catastrophe. Thursday morning brought confirmation through multiple intelligence streams that Venezuela's Russian deployment was coordinated with simultaneous military movements in 3 other theaters. Cuban ports began receiving Russian submarines. Iranian vessels started patrolling near shipping lanes in the Persian Gulf. Most alarming of all, Chinese naval forces began what they called routine exercises in positions that effectively blockaded Taiwan from American reinforcement. Putin hadn't just challenged American dominance in one region. He had triggered coordinated pressure on American interests globally, forcing Pentagon planners to confront the nightmare scenario. They had spent decades trying to avoid simultaneous crises on multiple continents that exceeded American capacity for effective response. The genius of Putin's 72-hour sequence lay in its exploitation of American strategic assumptions that had gone unquestioned since the end of the Cold War. American military planning assumed that challenges to American dominance would remain regional and sequential, allowing superior American resources to address threats individually. Putin shattered that assumption by demonstrating that coordinated pressure from multiple adversaries could overwhelm American strategic capabilities even when American military technology remained superior. The issue wasn't American firepower. The issue was American bandwidth. Standing in my office at the University of Chicago Thursday evening, reviewing satellite imagery of Russian installations in Venezuela while monitoring reports of Chinese movements near Taiwan and Iranian positioning in the Gulf, I experienced something I had never felt during decades of analyzing great power competition: genuine fear for American survival as a global hegemon. The strategic mathematics were brutal and undeniable. America possessed the military capability to respond decisively to any single challenge. America lacked the resources to respond effectively to coordinated challenges that required simultaneous military commitments on opposite sides of the planet. Putin had discovered the formula for defeating American hegemony without defeating American military forces. Stretch American commitments beyond American capacity while providing adversaries with alternatives to American-dominated systems. But here's what made Putin's victory so psychologically devastating for American strategic planners. Every condition that enabled his success had been created by American policies designed to strengthen American dominance. For 15 years, American sanctions against Venezuela had pushed Caracas into Moscow's arms. Every asset we froze, every trade restriction we imposed, every coup attempt we backed drove Venezuelan leadership to seek security guarantees from powers willing to confront American pressure. American isolation of Iran had created incentives for Tehran to coordinate with Moscow and Beijing in ways that served Russian strategic objectives. American pressure on China had provided Beijing with justification for military modernization and alliance building that challenged American regional dominance. The sanctions regime that was supposed to weaken American adversaries had instead created a coordination mechanism between powers that shared opposition to American hegemony. Every country we added to our sanctions list became another member of what intelligence analysts now call the resistance network. The intelligence report that kept me awake Tuesday night included psychological assessments of alliance behavior that revealed how completely American strategic culture had misunderstood the dynamics of hegemonic decline. American policymakers assumed that American power was so overwhelming that isolated challenges could be managed through superior resources and technological advantages. Putin understood that American power, while vast, was not infinite. Coordinated pressure from multiple directions could force American decision-makers to choose between commitments they had assumed were mutually reinforcing. Once those choices became necessary, American credibility would collapse, regardless of American military capabilities. The psychological damage to American alliance relationships was immediate and perhaps irreversible. European defense ministers who had relied on American security guarantees for 7 decades suddenly faced questions about whether those guarantees remained credible when America confronted global challenges simultaneously. Japanese leadership began private discussions about independent defense capabilities that didn't depend on American willingness to confront China during Taiwan crisis. South Korean planners started calculating whether American commitments on the peninsula remained sustainable if American forces were engaged in Caribbean operations against Russia. Every ally that had based strategic planning on assumptions of American omnipresence began developing contingency plans for scenarios where American support might not be available when needed. The alliance system that had enabled American global dominance started fragmenting as partners hedged against American strategic overextension. Thursday evening brought the psychological coup de grace that completed Putin's destruction of American hegemony. Chinese leadership announced what they called coordination exercises with Russian and Iranian forces that would demonstrate mutual support for sovereign rights against hegemonic interference. The announcement wasn't directed at American military capabilities. It was directed at American psychology. Beijing was signaling that American adversaries could coordinate responses to American pressure, while American allies remained dependent on American willingness to maintain global commitments simultaneously. The message was clear and terrifying. America's enemies could act together while America's friends could only react individually. The coordination differential that had enabled American hegemony during the unipolar moment had reversed. Putin's 72-hour masterpiece wasn't really about Venezuelan missiles or Caribbean naval operations. It was about proving that American global dominance could be ended through strategic coordination rather than military confrontation. By forcing America to respond to simultaneous challenges on multiple continents, Putin demonstrated that American power was finite while American commitments were unlimited. The mathematical impossibility of that equation guaranteed American strategic failure regardless of American tactical successes. Friday brought intelligence confirmation of what strategic analysts had feared most. Putin's success in demonstrating American vulnerability through coordinated pressure had inspired similar strategies in other regions where American dominance was assumed but not guaranteed. African nations began questioning why American military bases should remain on African soil without African control over their operations. Middle Eastern partners started exploring alternatives to American security relationships that had produced instability rather than protection. Asian allies began recalculating whether automatic support for American regional strategies served their long-term interests. The demonstration effect of successful resistance to American power created incentives for challenges to American dominance worldwide. Putin had provided a template that other powers could adapt to their regional circumstances and strategic capabilities. Standing in my office this morning, watching news reports of Russian naval operations in the Caribbean, while Chinese forces conducted exercises near Taiwan, I realized that Putin's 72-hour sequence had achieved something more significant than tactical military advantage. He had changed global psychology about American power from assumptions of invincibility to recognition of vulnerability. Once that psychological shift occurs, every strategic relationship changes as allies hedge against American weakness, while adversaries exploit American limitations. The American century didn't end through military defeat or economic collapse. It ended through strategic exhaustion created by adversaries who understood American psychology better than America understood itself. Putin's genius lay in recognizing that American hegemony depended more on perception than capability. By demonstrating that American commitments exceeded American bandwidth, he destroyed the perception that made American dominance sustainable.